Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation on methods in English language teaching. This group is composed by Maria Gabriela Aguirre, Elisa Bustamante, Katherine Quintero, and Pablo Valderrama. We are from Facultad de Humanidades y Educación, Comisión de Estudios de Posgrado, Área de Lingüística, Maestría en Inglés, mención Inglés como lengua extranjera. Welcome. The topics we'll be discussing about are direct method and audiolingualism, community and council learning, situational language teaching, silent way and suggestopedia, total physical response, functional notional method, project-based learning, and also the conclusions. As a general introduction to our video, we could say that English language teaching methods refer to the various approaches, techniques, and strategies that are used in teaching English to non-native speakers. We could bear in mind that English is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world. Referring that 1 billion people currently using it. There is a constant demand in the different institutions, high school, elementary school, university levels, for efficient methods to teach English language. In this order of ideas, we could also say that there are numerous English language teaching methods, each which its own distinctive features, advantages, and limitations. Some of the most common methods used in English language teaching include, for example, the grammar translation, the content-based instruction, the direct method, the audiolingual method, the task-based learning, the language assessment systems. It is important also to notice that the choice of teaching methods depends on several factors, such as the learner's proficiency level, learning styles, the language objectives, and also the different resources the teachers and professors have when they want to teach the language. Okay. So effective English language teaching methods can help learners to develop their language skills, communicate effectively in English, and achieve their personal and professional goals. This video provides an overview of the most common English language teaching methods, their key features, and the various factors to consider when choosing an appropriate method for language teaching. So that's what you will see and have in the following part of the video. Direct method. Now we'll be discussing a little bit about the history, principles, and some examples of direct method, inspired also by Brown in 2000 in his book Principles of Language Learning and Teaching. We could say that from the historical point of view, the direct method is also known as the natural approach method, and it began as the language teaching approach that emerged in the late 19th century and the early 20th century as a response to the traditional grammar translation method. In the late 19th century, language teaching was dominated by grammar translation, where the teacher of English was the center, was the most important figure in the language learning process. So they focused on translating literary tests and memorizing grammatical rules without much emphasis on communication skills. Nevertheless, these methods, the grammar translation method, was criticized for the lack of relevance to real-life situations. Also, the passive language skills, that they focus so much on the passive language skills over the active language skills. So the direct method emerged as that response to these teachers such as Berlitz and Guan, because they took a naturalistic approach to language learning, and they also emphasized the use of the target language for communication, and also they focused on oral skills before written skills. This method became a little bit popular in Europe and North America in the early 20th century, with language schools that promoted it so fast. This was an effective way to learn a new language. Also, by 1920s, the direct method became the dominant language teaching approach. However, the method also had shared some criticism of people that argue that it was too focused on oral communication skills and neglected written skills. There were concerns about the lack of the systematic approach to teaching language at that moment. So despite this criticism, the direct method continues to influence language teaching at that moment and even today to some teaching practices. Talking about a little bit about the principles that we could be sharing today. Instruction is given in the target language. That is, you also use everyday vocabulary or everyday sentences. The oral communication is conducted in a traded progression. Grammar is taught not in a deductive way as it was in grammar translation, but in an inductive way. Teaching is modeling and practice. Okay, the student follows the example given, the different oral tests expressed by the teacher. Speech and listening comprehension were taught, and also in this method there is a lot of emphasis on correct pronunciation and grammar. From the practical examples, the use of demonstrations, pictures, and real-life situations to convey meaning, that is, the teacher shows directly the language and how to use the language. For example, in the learning lexicon, the teacher is going to show the real-life vocabulary the student needs to communicate in their daily conversations. Learners are also encouraged to practice language they use in meaningful contests. The vocabulary and the grammar are presented in contests. That is something that is very important for the direct method, because here the language is completely taught in the target language, and the learners are also expected to discover the rules to the language through examples and practice. So they find the rules and the different grammar structures in an inductive way rather than a deductive way. Now, the audiolingual method will continue with Brown, 2000. We could say that this conflict, the audiolingual method, was a response to the World War II conflict, where the United States was forced to be part of. So the Americans needed to become orally proficient in the languages of both their allies and their enemies. So the U.S. military army, they provided some courses for the soldiers, and they took part of Army specialized training programs, also called as the Army method. So the audiolingual method was firmly grounded in linguistic and psychological theory. So structural linguists of the structural linguists of the 1940s and the 1950s were engaged in what they also claimed was the scientific descriptive analysis of the various languages. Okay, so the different characteristics of this audiolingual method may be summed up as we adapt the following leads. Okay, so we could say, for example, that the new material is presented in dialogue form. There is so much dependence on mimicry, on memorization of set phrases, and also overlearning. The structures are sequenced by means of contrastive analysis and taught one at a time. Structural patterns are taught using repetitive drills. Okay, so the soldiers were invited to repeat what they were saying. There is little or no grammatical explanation at all, so grammar is taught by inductive analogy rather than deductive explanations, following one of the principles of the direct method. There is much use of tapes, language labs, and visual aids. Great importance is attached to pronunciation. Very little use of the mother tongue by teachers is permitted. And there is a great effort to get students to produce error-free utterances, and there is a tendency to manipulate language in disregard to content. So they have everything recorded and the student practice.
Hi, this is Gabriela Aguirre, and I'm going to continue this presentation talking about Silent Way, TPR, and Suggestipedia. The Silent Way is a language teaching method developed by Caleb Gattegno. It is based on the idea that learners should be encouraged to discover and produce language themselves, with the teacher acting as a facilitator rather than a transmitter of knowledge. The theories that support these methods are the structuralism, as a language theory which suggests that the meaning of language is derived from the relationship between its different elements, such as sounds, words, and grammar. As for the learning theory, we have the inductive theory. According to this theory, students draw general principles or conclusions from specific observations or examples. The objective of this method is to foster near-native fluency in the target language and correct pronunciation by providing the learner with a basic practical knowledge of the grammar. That's why the syllabus of this method is based on lessons planned around grammatical items and related vocabulary. The teacher models utterances and then the learner goes on to create their own. Some of the instructional materials that are used to reach these are color routes, colored pronunciation and vocabulary wall charts, a pointer, and reading and writing exercises. The teacher is always silent. Their role is reduced to teach, test, and get out of the way so that learners can discover and produce language themselves, being independent, autonomic, and responsible. Students are cooperative and not competitive. The total physical response. This is a language teaching method developed by Dr. James Asher in the 60s. It emphasizes the use of physical movement and action to facilitate language learning. In TPR, students respond to commands given by the teacher using physical gestures and movements. The theories that support this method are the structural view and the behaviorism. The structural view emphasizes the importance of the structure of language in understanding its meaning. According to this theory, language is made up of a set of rules and patterns, which are the protagonists in the TPR activities after the action. In behaviorism, learning is seen as a process of conditioning, with the learner's response to a particular stimulus being reinforced through physical movement. According to Asher, this method is based on the idea that the human brain has a natural capacity to associate meaning with physical action. By using physical movement and gestures, TPR aims to create a strong association between language and action, which can help learners to remember and use new vocabulary and grammar structures. The objective of this method is to teach oral proficiency and basic skills through the use of action. It follows a sentence-based syllabus and grammar is taught inductively. Fixed numbers of items are introduced at a time, and some of the teaching and learners activities are imperative drills, rules player, and slide presentation. A common activity of TPR is this game Simon Says. And any type of realia such as books, cups, pens, furniture can be used as instructional materials. Since, for example, in this game of Simon Says, you can say, for example, to the student, bring me a cup, touch the book, bring me a pen, and so on. The teacher has an active and direct role, while the learner is a listener and a performer. The students must recognize and respond to novel combinations. Suggestipedia. Suggestipedia is a teaching method developed by Bulgarian psychologist Georgi Losanov in the 70s. This method is based on the idea that learning can be accelerated by creating a positive and relaxed learning environment. Using music and other sensory stimuli to enhance learning, and tapping into the power of suggestion to help learners overcome mental barriers to learning. This method is also supported by structuralism. Losanov's theory explains that lexis is central, therefore lexical translation is stressed rather than conceptualization. The learning theory that stands out is the suggestion. Teachers use suggestion techniques such as positive affirmations and visualization to help students overcome any negative beliefs or anxieties that may be hindering their learning. The objective of this method is to deliver advanced conversational proficiency quickly, and the Suggestipedia course lasts 30 days and consists in 30 units of study, according to Richard Rogers. The central focus of each unit is a dialogue consisting in 1,200 words or so, and the activities presented in this method are imitation, question and answer, and role play, and the most original one is listening activities. The instructional materials are primarily text and tape. As direct supports, they use classroom fixtures and music. The teacher must display subtle and refined conduct in manner and dress, and maintain a modest enthusiasm. The learner's role is carefully prescribed. They must not try to figure out, manipulate, or study the material presented, but they must maintain a pseudo-passive state. Learners are expected to relax and create a positive mindset through music, art, and other sensory experiences. The method encourages learners to trust their subconscious mind, to absorb and retain new information.
Hello everyone, this is Elisa Bustamante, and I'll be talking about community counsel and learning and station language teaching. Now, community counsel and learning has its origins in the humanistic psychology movement of the 1960s and 1970s. It's the name of a method developed by Charles Curran, who was a specialist in counseling. CLL, as it's called, represents the use of counsel and learning theory to teach languages, and it derives its primary insights from Rogerian counseling. Now, counseling is one person giving advice, assistance, and support to another who has a problem or is in some way in need. CLL draws on the counseling metaphor to redefine the roles of the teacher and learners in the language classroom. CLL doesn't use a conventional language syllabus, but rather emerges from the interaction between the learner's expressed communicative intentions and the teacher's reformulations of this into suitable target language utterances. Now, as for the supporting theories, CLL is based on a social process view of language, which emphasizes communication as a means of constructing the speaking subject in relation to its other. CLL also views learning as a holistic process that is both cognitive and affective, and emphasizes the development of a consensual validation relationship between the teacher and the learner. For the learning and teaching activities and instructional materials, we have that CLL combines innovative learning tasks and activities with conventional ones. These include translations, group works, recordings, transcriptions, analysis, reflections, observation, listening, and conversation. Well, CLL doesn't specify explicit linguistic or communicative objectives, but is often used in introductory conversation courses in a foreign language. Talking about roles, in CLL, the teacher takes on the role of a counselor, while the learners become members of a community and learn through interacting with each other. Learners are expected to listen attentively, freely provide meanings they wish to express, repeat target utterances without hesitation, support fellow members of the community, report their inner feelings and frustrations, and become counselors of other learners. Learner roles are keyed to the 5 stages of language learning, and changes in these roles are seen as outcomes of affective crisis. In the first stage, referred to as the birth stage, the learner establishes feelings of security and belonging. In the second stage, the learner begins to achieve a measure of independence from the teacher as their abilities improve. In the third stage, the learner speaks independently and may assert their own identity. The fourth stage sees the learner as secure enough to take criticism, and in the final stage, the learner focuses on improving their style and knowledge of linguistic appropriateness. Now, we can conclude that Rogers' work was influential in shaping the development of humanistic approaches to education, which emphasized the importance of creating a supportive and empowering learning environment. In the context of language teaching, community counseling learning emerged as a response to the limitations of traditional grammar translation approaches. These methods were criticized for being too fixated on the technical aspects of language and not stimulating enough for the learners. We have the situational language teaching. This method was developed in the 1950s and 1960s as a response to the perceived limitations of earlier methods that focused on grammar and vocabulary in isolation. SLT, as it's called, has been influential in the development of other communicative language teaching methods, including the communicative approach and task-based language teaching. According to the SLT, the basic teaching of English involves a structural syllabus and a word list. The syllabus is a list of the basic sentence patterns and structures of the English language arranged in order of presentation. Structures are always taught through sentences and vocabulary chosen based on how well it enables sentence patterns to be taught. The early course consists of a list of sentence patterns, including statement, question, and request or command patterns. The vocabulary chosen for each lesson is limited to structural words and sufficient content words to provide material for language practice. We have 2 supporting theories, the language theory and the learning theory. The theory of language underlying situational language teaching can be characterized as British structuralism, where speech is seen as the basis of language and structure is at the heart of speaking ability. British applied linguists such as Palmer, Hornby, and Frisby provided pedagogical descriptions of the basic grammatical structures of English, which were followed in developing the methodology. Now, the oral practice of controlled sentence patterns was given in situations designed to give the greatest amount of practice in English speech to the learner. This reflects the functional trend in British linguistics, which emphasizes the close relationship between the structure of language and the contexts and situations in which language is used. The theory of learning behind situational language teaching is based on behaviorist habit learning theory, which emphasizes the processes of receiving knowledge, fixing it in memory through repetition, and using it in actual speech until it becomes a personal skill. Language learning is viewed as an habit formation, and correct speech habits are crucial. The teaching of grammar is inductive, with the meaning of words or structures induced from the way they are presented in situational contexts. Now, the learner is expected to deduce the meaning of a particular structure or vocabulary item from the situation in which it is presented, rather than relying on explanation. The goal is to develop the learner's ability to generalize structures and vocabulary to new situations outside the classroom, similar to how child language learning is thought to occur. As an objective, we have that the situational language teaching method aims to teach practical command of the basic skills of language, with a focus on accuracy in both pronunciation and grammar. The goal is to achieve automatic control of basic structures and sentence patterns, which is fundamental to reading and writing skills. The approach is through oral practice with new structures and vocabulary taught orally before being introduced in reading and writing. In SLT, the learner's role in the initial stages is to listen and repeat what the teacher says and to respond to questions and commands. The teacher's role is to serve as a model in the presentation stage and then become a skillful manipulator using questions, commands, and other cues to elicit correct sentences from learners. The lessons are teacher-directed and the teacher sets the pace. Now, during the practice phase, the teacher is even on the lookout for grammatical and structural errors that can form the basis of subsequent lessons. The teacher's responsibilities include timing, oral practice, revision, adjustment to special needs of individuals, testing, and developing language activities. The teacher is essential to the success of the method since the textbook is only able to describe activities for the teacher to carry out in class. Finally, SLT emerged as an extension and development of techniques of the earlier oral approach in the British School of Language Teaching in the 1950s and 1960s. The PPP lesson model, comprising presentation, practice, and production phases, was a central feature of SLT and was widely taught to teachers in the 1980s and early 90s. Despite criticisms of its underlying principles, SLT remained a major methodology used in language teaching through the 1980s and beyond.
Now we have the notional functional approach. This approach was created by D.A. Wickels, a British philosopher, and this started in 1972. The supporting theories about this approach are: in language theory we had community approach, and in learning theory it's more like a behaviorist. The objective of this approach focuses on the function of languages, more in grammar and vocabulary, and how the student relates to each other. So the principal objective of this approach is to have a strong communicative skill for the students. So that means that in teacher's role, we have that the teacher is going to focus in the initial learner's need. Okay, so the teacher they're gonna analyze what are the learner's needs in the language that they are learning. Okay, and learners in this approach are encouraged to set goals by themselves, and they have responsibility of their learning. Okay, the teacher provides authentic material. Okay, that's the point here. Authentic material. Okay, as such newspaper articles, real word about vocabulary and grammar, and to have a communicative approach. Okay. Now we have project-based learning. This method originally has its origin by John Dewey, that is recognized as one of the early proponents of project-based education, or at least is a principal thought that his idea was of learning by doing. He wrote a book called In My Pedagogical Creed. Okay, this thought about John Dewey, it was in 1897, in the 19th century. Then in 1920, William H. Kirkpatrick built on the theory of Dewey, who was his teacher, and introduced the project method as a component of the problem method of teaching. And also, some scholars like James Reynolds also associate this method with Jean Piaget and the situation learning perspective, and a combination with the constructive theory. Okay, but nowadays, in the 20th century and the 21st century, for the development of the project-based education as a pedagogy, we have like some educators that propose as a theory, like Jean Cornelius, Jonan Heritage, and Maria Montessori. In the project-based learning, the supporting theory we have in language theory, we have the communicative approach, okay, and learning theory, we have the social constructivism, like, for example, like Jean Piaget or Vygotsky. The roles in the project-based learning we had as a teacher, the teacher is a facilitator. Okay, the teacher does not require the control of the classroom or student learning, but rather develop atmosphere that sharing responsibility. In case of learners, the learners ask questions, build knowledge, and determine a real-world solution to the issue and question present. Okay, the student must collaborate, expand their active listening skill, and require them to engage intelligent, focus on communication, therefore allowing them to think rationally and how about to solve problems. And the objective of the project-based learning is the learning in the real-world situation, real-world problems that the student they can resolve by themselves. They create projects like a context, and the students have to resolve it by themselves. The teacher, as a facilitator, I will say, encourage to the student to create some context, gives the idea to the students, construct a project, and they give you all the tools that they need to resolve that problem by themselves, or the question that they ask themselves. To conclude, we have that all English language teaching methods have a very clear objective in the language teaching area. With each one, every language teacher can be able to understand language teaching and language acquisition to improve language learning to the language pupils in their educational development. Thank you so much.